Hey, before we get going, today's show is brought to you by Growers & Co., who have launched a brand new magazine specifically for growers like you, growers like me. This will be a twice-a-year publication with articles centering on the culture of small-scale farming. In the first issue, which you can buy right now at growers.co, there are several really awesome farmer profiles, some great essays. I wrote one on regenerative agriculture, so maybe I'm biased. It is a really cool publication. I am excited to be a part of it. For the uninitiated, Growers & Co. is the brainchild of Jean-Martin Fortier, who is working to create a tool and apparel company with a focus on small-scale farming. The goal of Growers & Co. is to be a brand that represents the dignity, skills, and creativity required to do this work. Since I've known JM, he has been working on this idea, and it is pretty cool to see nearly a decade of work come to fruition. Learn more at growers.co. Today's show is also brought to you, again this season, by our friends at BCS America.
BCS two-wheel tractors power dozens of professional quality, PTO-driven attachments for soil working, mowing, property maintenance, snow removal, and more. BCS tractors are famous for their durability and versatility, with handlebars that rotate 180 degrees for front and rear mount implements. And now, BCS has introduced a game changer in the two-wheel tractor world, Model 770 with Hydrostatic Drive. Model 770's Easy Grip lever enables the operator to precisely select ground speed and direction of travel without the need to shift or vary the throttle. This is extremely useful for heavy mowing or snow clearing jobs where constant changes in direction or speed are necessary. Now you can keep the flail mower running at full RPM while you mow forward, reverse, and forward again, all without the need to shift or re-engage the PTO. The Hydrostatic Model 770 is on sale now. Check out bcsamerica.com for sale pricing and to find your nearest dealer. That's bcsamerica.com.
All right, let's jam. Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, Episode 5, Season 3. Got a great episode for you this week with Matthew and Nancy Cost of Buffalo Seed Company outside of Kansas City, who are growing and breeding no-till seeds. Nancy has a master's in tomato breeding and is the lead grower for their company, but their growing style is very simple. They use a lot of straw mulch and do much of their cultivation with one small hand tool called a Lucana, which is from Nancy's native home of Bolivia. Nancy grew up in Bolivia, and we talk about the agriculture there and some traditional intercroppings that she likes to use, which she calls associations, which is a great term for it, and how there is no division between seed saving and vegetable growing there in Bolivia. We also get a little philosophical about seeds and the pandemic. It's a great conversation, and I'm super excited to continue poking into the small scale seed purveyors and what we as veg growers, which I can imagine most of us are who listen to this podcast, can learn from them. Before we get going, remember that nothing we do is possible without the help of our patrons at patreon.com/no-till-growers. That's what largely funds this show and all of our work. We have a lot of cool things in the works, so if you want to support that, you can. Also, subscribe to this podcast wherever you're getting it. Other than that, let's get into this amazing conversation with Matthew and Nancy Cost of Buffalo Seed Company.
Matthew and Nancy Cost, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, we're happy to be here.
Yeah, super excited to have you all on. So to give us the rundown, where are you all located and how much land are you working on there? And those sorts of things?
Yeah, so we're located in what we call the greater Kansas City area, which we reference that as, 100 miles around Kansas City. Our physical location of the Buffalo Seed Company is located in Shawnee, Kansas, and we've got a total of 4 different grow sites that we do our seed production on. And the main one is in Welda, Kansas, which is a little over an hour south of Kansas City. And we've also have 2 different sites in Shawnee, Kansas, and a 4th site in Linwood, Kansas, which is around probably about 30 to 40 minutes west of Kansas City. Our main grow site is in Welda, Kansas, and It's a farm site that our family owns that's around 25 acres. Currently, it's probably about 10 acres of land that we can produce on. And right now out there, we're doing around an acre of production. And in Linwood, we have, probably a quarter acre and quarter to a half an acre. And then the two different sites in Shawnee, Kansas, total up to about a quarter of an acre as well.
Okay, so like 1 3/4 to around 2 acres, somewhere in that altogether.
Yeah, I'd say right around that area.
Nice. And is it all seed production, or is there some produce in there as well?
All seed production. Well,
Yeah.
not for
Okay.
eating.
Yeah, so we're definitely focusing on seed production right now. Of course, we eat quite a bit out of there, but we're not currently doing any market farming.
Okay. Cool. And then what's the sort of marketing outlets? Like, in terms of marketing, are you selling your seeds primarily or exclusively online, or what's do you do any wholesale or seed racks? Like, what's that look like?
When we started originally, we did it online mainly, and then we start talking with local stores. So we don't have a rack; we call it boxes seeds, and we put it like six packets of each variety. And we've been here in Kansas City and Lawrence, which is like a 30 miles away from here. And also last year we sent it some to Ohio and Iowa.
Nice. And those are just going in like various sort of garden stores?
Yeah. Matthew, can you explain more about the box?
Yeah, so we like Nancy was saying, we had online sales, and this was before the virus broke out, and so we had online sales, and then they were going okay, but we decided that it'd be good to try to get into some stores. The first store we got into was, well, let me backtrack. So we have these seeds, and we're like, okay, we don't have any seed racks, and I've got a bit of a background in woodworking, so I decided I would start handcrafting some cedar boxes that could, hold our seeds that we could use as a display and, have our logo on the front of the box. And also have, various cards with images of the varieties that we were selling that would, were kind of like, bookmarks essentially within the box, so you could kind of move through the box and see the different varieties and things like this. So our first client on the retail side was Cotton's Hardware, which is a nice little local hardware store out in Lawrence, Kansas. And it was pretty interesting how that all started. I ended up calling Linda at Cotton's Hardware, and, I was trying to do a sales pitch, and she real nice lady, and she kind of started guiding us on what our model should be. And she's like, usually seed companies, they'll, sell a box at a certain price, give a bit of a discount, so that they can make a profit on it as well. And then for seeds that aren't sold, usually people offer us 50% credit for the next purchase. And so she kind of schooled us on that, and we followed that model ever since. So the next spot that we went to was the Merck. It's a co-op in Lawrence, kind of a food co-op where a lot of local farmers sell produce. So we were able to get into there. And then the next client was kind of a nursery that had two different locations. So we moved into that space. And then we ended up getting Ray Gun, which I think is based out of Iowa. We ended up getting a few boxes in with them. There's a place called Made in KC that sells all Kansas City-based products that are, crafted or grown in the region. So we've moved in with them as well. And, initially that part of our business, that first year was, challenging because we didn't really have our name out there much. And we were able to acquire funding on the front end for those. So we would, essentially charge them an amount. They would cut us a check, and then they would call when they needed refills. So it kind of provided us a chunk of money to drift through the first year of production, which was quite nice. Once the pandemic spurred, the market demand shifted kind of away from those stores because people couldn't get out and about as much. And so at that point, our online sales, really spiked heavy. So it proved beneficial to kind of have this diversified, marketing strategy, which is not really surprising for us because we're all about diversity and, diversity being leading to resiliency and ultimately sustainability. So it was interesting to see that concept held in the market space as well. Yeah,
that's great. I love hearing that story of the woman helping you kind of figure out what your model is. That's great. I love that. Are you doing any seed contracts? Like, are you contracted for anybody?
So what do you mean by contracted?
Oh, like, are you doing any contracts for any bigger seed purveyors or anything like that? Or that's kind of
No.
not in your wheelhouse, or that's something you're not really interested in?
No, we are mainly like what we want to sell is that what we grow, and like, yeah, we're not really having a contract for growing, or we don't have a contract with anybody who could be growing for us either.
Great. So you're kind of just focusing locally.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So the concept is, and I think we'll probably talk a little bit more about it, but the concept of local adaptation, and, what we're really trying to focus in on is, making sure that the seeds that we're selling have had at least one season of production, in our area. And I've got a bit of a background in climate modeling. So, the stuff that we grow right here matches climates kind of throughout the Midwest. And so it's not necessarily just locally, but kind of more regionally. And so we're really trying to, get the seeds to where they can withstand the climate conditions here, so that they're really tailored to, being able to deal with what we experience. And, one aspect of that is that we don't water, we don't use any field irrigation at all, because we're trying to, shape the populations that we're growing, into being able to be grown with minimal inputs, to try to chase that elusive goal of, sustainability, that we can kind of get closer and closer to it. And so, that's kind of really the focus, is to minimize inputs through the use of local adaptation.
Yeah, that's great. Shaping the populations kind of around drought resistance and those sorts of things.
Yeah, exactly. And, obviously there's some of the varieties we plant out, we get, obviously pest pressures and various things. And some of the varieties are not real happy, and they don't make the cut. We kind of let nature do the breeding for us, at least that first phase of breeding. If they can't give us seeds to sell, then we can't sell the seeds.
Right. Speaking of backgrounds, you mentioned, climate modeling. Can you both tell us a little bit about your backgrounds, like what got you into this and those sorts of things?
Well, I'm originally from Bolivia, and I grew up in farming, basically, but we never really had this separation between seeds and food. It was like I grew up growing potatoes, quinoas, fabas, with llamas. Everything was around us, and whenever we were working with seeds, we select certain heads of quinoa. That was our selection for the quinoa. For potatoes, we select certain size and keep those ones, store them for seeds. And so that's how I grew up. And when I finished high school, I got a scholarship to go study agronomy in Costa Rica, which is a whole different climate than what I come from. But then also kind of opened my mind to learn more about tropical crops and other ways of working in agriculture. And I studied there 4 years, and then I got a an internship at the Ohio State University to work with grafting tomatoes. Basically, was breeding rootstocks using wild tomatoes. And then I had the opportunity to apply for the Ohio State University to do my master's degree on horticulture and crop science. And that's where we met with Matthew years back. And we finished there our studies. And when we met together, we always were kind of learning about the local food movement back then. And then also we start always gardening since then and saving seeds. And we were always saving seeds. And then we're always looking for new ways of find new type of seeds, exchanging with different friends. And then one year after I finished in 2013, in 2014, Matthew had another year left of school, and I decided to do it's called an optional training when you come as an international student, where you can do your own project basically, or you can work with any other company. I decided to do kind of like farming market. So I was working there with local roots, and I was farming. We had a friend who let us use his land, and that's when we realized how the seed was basically very separated from the food production. Of course, like back then, the local food, more people were getting involved in the food and local food, but we went to this little store seed, and I was like, in my head was the same thing, like, okay, when you grow your food, you means you harvest right from there. And I asked this lady, like, so how do you grow these seeds? And she was like, what do you mean how do we grow? We just repack them and we sell it. We don't grow them. It was kind of like a realization for us, like, oh, not everybody saves their seeds. So that was like back in 2014. In 2015, we kind of traveled back to Bolivia. And then in 2015, the same year, when our son was born in Bolivia, Matthew and I went back to Arizona. He got a position there working with native seed search. And then it was the same thing, like we're trying to kind of like connect the seeds, the food. There wasn't really a connection. And he worked there for a while, and we had the opportunity to come back to Kansas. And again, I was growing food we were growing and trying to find this diversity of seeds. And I was calling to different little companies, like, how do you grow these seeds? Because I wanted to know, like, whether these seeds were water or not, like what Matthew was talking earlier. And it was the same thing. It's like, no, we don't grow all our seeds. We just buy in bulk, and we can contact you with our buyer where this lot comes from, and we can figure out where the seed was grown. That was like a big kind of like disappointed, because there was no connection that closes the cycle of local food production. So that's when we started in 2018, like, we need to have like a local seed production so it can close the cycle. So that was kind of like in my journey to this point. Now Matthew can say his part.
Yeah, so I grew up outside this, well, kind of in not really the urban area, but just outside of Kansas City, kind of in a working class neighborhood, kind of small 2-bedroom box, cookie cutter houses, and didn't really have an agricultural upbringing at all. And I went to the University of Kansas, and I was studying evolution of flowers and how pollinators, affect the evolution of, flower shapes and things like this. And, kind of over, hundreds of thousands or millions of years of time. And we're using some techniques. I was doing an undergraduate degree, and we were using some techniques that, at the time I didn't know it, but were, essentially genetic engineering. And so I was, it was magical using these techniques to answer these questions, but I kind of started diving more into, what these techniques were, trying to become better at them essentially. And I came across a scientific manuscript by a guy by the name of Ignacio Chapella, and it was a study where he had gone down into the center of origin of maize, which is down in kind of southern Mexico. And he basically found out that there were transgenes that were moving into landrace corn populations down in the region, and that it was kind of disrupting the the diversity and also the cultures in the region. And I remember I was reading it at night, and it really struck me. I said, okay, so this is interesting, because the technology that I'm using to answer questions is negatively affecting other cultures potentially. And so it spurred me off on a completely different path of inquiry. And I ended up quitting that job, that lab. I finished up my degree, and I remember telling myself, I want to get down into southern Mexico and use my knowledge to try to make that wrong, right. And I was working in a sunflower field doing some work with studying, transgene flow from domesticated sunflowers to wild sunflowers. And I'm wondering how I'm going to get down to southern Mexico. And all of a sudden there was a lady by the name of Kristen Mercer that was from Ohio State University that showed up in these sunflower fields when I was doing research. And she said, hey, I'm doing research down in Mexico on landrace corn down there, and she gave me an opportunity to start a doctorate degree. So I moved up to Ohio and started that research. Ended up spending some time down in Chiapas, Mexico, basically trying to study how elevation and climatic difference along an elevational gradient, how that affects the genetics of the land races that the Mayan culture are growing down that region. And during that time, I was educated on that and so on and so forth. But really what I was educated on was the growing corn in traditional ways in rain-fed systems. And that really had a massive impact on me. And then, as Nancy said, we ended up moving up to Worcester, Ohio together I was doing my doctorate and she was doing her master's. We lived on a sheep farm during that time. We were raising a herd of around 300 sheep up there, and also farming, and kind of really started diving into that passion together. Nancy really schooled me on, she's a great grower. She's, the head grower of the company, and she really brought me up to par on that. And then my kind of passion with seeds really kind of was able to excel. In 2014, Nancy, she didn't have papers to stay in the U.S. We were talking about getting married, and she looked at me. She's basically, I don't know if it was directly said this, but was more or less like, hey, if you want to be with me, you need to travel to South America, and meet my family and so on and so forth. And I said, okay. So we ended up, we wanted to do a trek. So we flew into Costa Rica, and then we backpacked, down through Latin America, and kind of met some of Nancy's colleagues that she was in school with in Costa Rica, and looked at some of their production systems. And when we got down into Peru or into Bolivia, I ended up assuming a position with Bioversity International, and I was working with the Peruvian government trying to conserve quinoa and amaranth diversity in the Andean region there. And so that was a pretty interesting thing. And we decided we want to get back up to the States, as Nancy said. I ended up in Tucson, Arizona, as the conservation director for Native Seed Search, kind of overseeing their collection of thousands of varieties of desert adapted crops in the region, which was just a beautiful collection. We realized that we were working with cultures during that time to try to integrate those seeds back into the culture. And what was apparent was that there was a lack of farmers that could actually grow these varieties. So that we ended up coming back, and I assumed a position with a local nonprofit that's working on, it's called Cultivate Kansas City, and they're basically trying to increase the number of small-scale local farmers in the region. And so I really dove into the local food scene and the kind of the farming production side of things. And then what I realized here is that we didn't really have a seed system set up. So Nancy and I spurred off on the business venture to really try to develop that seed system for the developing local food movement in the area here.
Yeah, that's really cool. There's so many interesting things in there. The evolution of the flowers, the quinoa in Peru, what Nancy was talking about with seeds and food in Bolivia. I think all that stuff is really fascinating, and I'm wondering now, like, how those sort of influences, and especially with Nancy as like the head grower, like wondering if you can kind of describe your sort of production system in terms of just soil work and those sorts of things.
Yeah, well, over there, like when I was growing up, we didn't have any machines, so everything was done by hand, and we have these little tools called Leucana.
Okay, so this tool is spelled Leukana, Leucana, which is super fun to say, but it is a little hard to find a lot of info about it online. Basically, it looks like a wooden handle with a steel piece coming off at about a 90-degree angle. It's not very long. It's maybe like 2 feet. Anyway, I hope that helps you envision it as she talks about it.
It's a very basic tool. It has a hand, and it has like a little shape. How do you call the shape, Matthew?
How it's kind of curved back.
Curved back, and we use those kind of tools for all our farming in Bolivia, and that really, I think we have. I plant with that little tool. Everything we plant is with that little tool, basically. Either Matthew's digging or I am digging, because we don't do much tilling. I think last year, in order to, we're basically doing the transition to non-tilling by using mulch, because originally we kind of had to till the land because it was a lot of grass. So we kind of like open up the land. But this year, when we are planting, I try to use I open up spaces where I'm going to put the seed, or if I'm transplanting, enough space to open up. That really have an impact. And also, I like to do a lot of intercropping, or call like association, where I'm going to have taller plants like sunflower if some type of plants need a little bit more shade, or they can tolerate shade in order to use more efficiently the space. And also, like, for example, if you put tomatoes with marigolds or calendulas, things like that, kind of like trying to use efficiently the space. And also like trying to use some plants, for example, like put it in the sunflower top and then you put it in the bottom like cowpeas. The cowpeas kind of shaded off, but they can kind of tolerate the shade of sunflowers. So kind of like that system of association I learned at Earth University in Costa Rica, where like how you can use efficiently different plants, and we do kind of try to use herbs to repel any pests, basically, and then also, like, I think from Matthew, he put his inputs of like the milpa, the three sister systems, putting the corn, and then we put the beans to climb, and we put the squash to run, and you can cover the area. And this year we had some potatoes. We do the mounting, which is a very important thing to do, at least in Bolivia. That's the way we grow potatoes. Like, you have to mount. You don't mount the potatoes, you don't have potatoes. So yes, it did had a lot of, I think, like in terms of growing, that's how we try to go, and we try to go as efficiently as we can, but at the same time, like, as sustainable as we can. And yeah, we don't use any besides fertilizer. Like, we use compost or chicken manure. And in terms of pest control, it's all, if like Matthew said, if the plants got eaten up by pests and there is no seeds, we don't sell the seeds. But we do use herbal plants,
Right. So you do some things to help deter those pests, but ultimately you're not actively fighting them. You're not doing anything that's, spraying or anything like that, right?
No, sometimes what we do, like, no, we don't spray anything. Like I think with the Colorado beetle on potatoes, we do, this year we use the kids. Go check at the early season when they have eggs. That's the best way to control them. So go underneath the plants and check them if there is eggs and take them out. So that was the only thing, like I would say, like a direct control. Other than that, just let the nature take care of.
Can you describe a little bit more about Nancy, can you describe maybe a little bit more about like farming in Bolivia in terms of were there a lot of mulches and that sort of thing used on your farm? Or
No,
what was the agriculture like there?
the highlands, like we're talking about, 11 feet above the sea level, it's high. As Matthew calls it desert. It's not desert because we grow food. So it's back in the day, like I'm talking 1995, 1990s, when people were more because like you grow the quinoas in the we call like pampas. It's basically just a flat land. And then in the mountains, you grow the potatoes because that's what my grandparents used to say. There is more moisture there because of the rocks. So, but it used to be like when I remember the first time I planted quinoa, they used to do kind of like what is this, like a localized tilling. They used to just mount during January. They used to mount soil every 3 feet apart. And then in September, right now, basically, they're planting. They will plant right there the quinoa. And they didn't have any weeds. The weeds will be all around there where it's not mountain. But where it's mountain, there will not be any weeds. That's how they used to plant it. But then I think 1996, the first tractor that arrived there to the highlands. And people start tilling. So January, people become tilling. And then after that, September, people start planting. And then 1999, it came the tractors with planting tractors. And people, of course, everybody's going to try to find the easiest way to do it. So in 1999, people start planting with tractors. But it wasn't as efficient as it is now. It seems like it's more efficient. They're more precise. But back then, because when you are planting, over there, it's not like here we have nice moisture. Like sometimes the moisture will be like half foot down, so you have to kind of dig it out, all the dry soil, and then get on the wet part. So we did a lot of like replanting that year with people because the young kids basically are the one who plants because they pay you, And then after that, the price of quinoa came very high, and of course there was a lot of fighting over the land, and people forgot how to do the traditional way, and then started coming some type of pesticides, and people started applying pesticides. So it kind of become these. But then it kind of become like the same issue like as a corn. In order for you to survive, you have to recuperate this production or you're going to be just broke. But then they start separating the market where like organic with no pesticides were more expensive. So right now people started going back to what our grandparents used to do. Because like when the price was up, everybody was just like growing every year. Before it was like 1 year the production was on a certain area, the other side was left to rest, and that area was used for animals, sheep and llamas. But with the quinoa price, nobody needed llamas, nobody needed sheep, so the llamas and the sheep went down, and there was just quinoa everywhere. But now they start getting back and start adding animals, and that's really nice to see people start getting conscious, And yeah, my mom started getting more, like she has her llamas, she has her quinoa, and started using the same rotation, how they always used like that before.
Matthew, did you have something you wanted to add to the production side of things there?
Yeah, just quickly, like I said, Nancy, she's just a phenomenal grower, and she's got a way with plants. It's magical. But and I think early on when we were doing market farming up in Ohio, there was a gentleman by the name of Bill Boyer that was really big on using. He was going to like old horse stables and getting the bedding, the used bedding that had the horse manure and the straw, and he was using that to mulch out, and then he was planting into that, and he didn't till much. I mean, he could just keep applying that and just keep planting into it, and so Nancy brought that with her when we started growing out here, and like she said, we would till to break the soil and get the soil opened up. And then we didn't use the horse manure straw technique. We were either using rye straw, locally sourced rye straw, or just hay as well. We used hay. Sometimes we use hay, but we'd end up putting that down, and so as the sites go through, after a year, we end up not having to till. So, the 3 sites that we have, not our main growing site, but the other 3 sites, we're not tilling at all. We essentially go in and, we're weeding, and then we're just throwing down more mulch and then opening up and planting. And so the transition out at the big site has been a little more challenging, our main site, just because of the size. And also the field that we're planting is kind of an old it's never really been tilled. It's kind of an old meadow pasture area that they used to graze cattle on. There's a lot of native wildflowers and stuff like that. But as we're trying to transition, there's the weed pressure is really intense. And so, we're slowly trying to get that system down like that as well. We ended up tilling a second year out there, and I think we're getting close to having things tamed enough to where we can kind of just continue to integrate that mulching system into a no-till system. So it's been really cool to see how Nancy transitions these systems into no-till pretty quickly, and of course the organic matter that we're able to put into the soil through all the mulching. And we do have some background with cover cropping and stuff like that. We haven't really got into it that much yet. We do have goals to start integrating that into the system a little bit more as well. But the transition on the towards no-till has been very interesting to see how Nancy's doing that.
Hey, you all, just jumping in real quick to get a word from our sponsors, like our good friends, Ramblin' Farmers. Seasoned farmhands are hard to come by, especially for temporary help. With 5 years of experience on over 12 farms, Ramblin' Farmers are ready to jump in and help you get the job done. They're independent contractors willing to travel. Learn more at ramblinfarmers.com. Today's show is also brought to you by you, our Patreon members at patreon.com/no-till-growers. You can kick us a few bucks at Venmo to @no-till-growers. That's always cool. But Patreon is the best way to guarantee this show keeps going and growing, and we're able to do more things like the 3 podcasts that we're starting that, once again, we haven't really announced yet. But also, at a certain level on the Patreon page, or if you just jump up from one level to another, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Scott Snodgrass, Jean-Martin Fortier, and Neil Feigels. Sorry, Neil. Thank you, though. Thank you to all of our show supporters. Back to the interview.
Yeah, that's great. Can you talk a little bit about some of the crops that you're producing? Like what are some, I know that Nancy, you said that you have, is it a master's in tomato breeding?
Yes.
Is that one of the crops that you're focusing on?
Yeah. Tomatoes is, I think, one of our main. It was like the original. But then we have, I think, like common beans, like maybe 22 types of common beans. We have lettuce, like around 8. We have maize, 6 or 7 of them. Peppery beans, flowers. This year we started growing biennials like turnips, beets. What else? Kale. What else we have as a biennial? Oh, I'm trying to think. Then we have spinach. We got it spinach as well. Sweet peas. We have black common. I mean, we added a lot of diversity this year.
Yeah, so I think we have probably around getting close to 200 varieties that we're growing right now, and a lot of them. That's kind of where Nancy and I fused really hard. Was I was really into trying to get diversity that would work in the area, and then she was. Once you give her seeds, she just runs with them. So originally, like the bean varieties, we have probably 20 or 30 varieties from the Appalachian Mountains that we grew out this year from a grower that had been kind of preserving or conserving varieties in the region there. A lot of varieties we picked up, some down in the desert Southwest. So we've got like Devil's Claw and Rattle Gourds and different varieties of things from down there. We picked up,
watermelon.
I'm a corn, lots of watermelons and I'm a corn guy. So we've got some really interesting corns like Cherokee White flower corn that grows probably 12 feet tall and has, a foot and a half long cobs. This year we're growing it's a purple corn from Peru that a gentleman down in North Carolina crossed with some landrace varieties from Montana that we've got growing. And it's a very long season corn, but it was crossed with some varieties up in the north to try to, reduce the growing season. So we've got that going on. And then we also moved into kind of our big push this year was basically I modeled the climate of our region here, and then I projected that around the world. And then we accessed the seed banks from the USDA to identify landrace varieties that were grown in regions around the world that match our climate. So we sourced those with the idea that, that since it's similar to our climate and that they're land races that have been grown traditionally, with seed saving systems, that those varieties would probably do pretty well here. So we sourced a lot of carrots. We've probably got 10 different carrot land races kind of from the Middle East region. We've got, probably 10 or 12 different varieties of wheat. So we've got some einkorn wheats, some emmer wheats, some common wheats, lots of different stuff that we sourced in. And surprisingly, a lot, maybe not surprisingly, since they were sourced from regions similar to here, they've all done pretty well. And it's kind of exotic diversity and very interesting stuff. I think last year we grew around 30 varieties of garlic land races that we source globally as well. And so we're kind of, what we've realized, there's some groups that are, kind of maintaining the diversity that was originally here in the United States, but a lot of that diversity has gone to the wayside. So our idea is that we can, basically infuse diversity into the region that's, somewhat familiar with our region and start kind of introducing diversity into that, the base of the developing local food movements around the states,
Yeah, that's great. How can you talk a little bit about you're in the Midwest, so I'm thinking that especially with something like corn, how are you avoiding contamination? What does that process look like for avoiding sort of genetic modification contamination?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we let all of our, we don't use any bagging methods to do crosses or anything. So a lot of it's, spatial distancing for our varieties that we're producing. So that's part of the reason we have 4 different growing locations. So for our outcrossing crops, like corn and squash and things like that, to where we can keep them spatially distributed, but also, like you said, I mean, you get a monoculture, cornfield planted, and you're sitting there thinking, okay, so if we plant the same time, we're obviously going to be contaminated. So we basically, determine when the main fields are being planted, and then we wait at least 3 weeks. This year, Nancy had been kind of playing with that timing mechanism, and we're able to get 3 different crops in this season. But we really monitor when the corn crop in the region is going in the ground, and then we wait at least 3 weeks before we plant. And then, so by the time the monoculture crops are done tasseling, that's right when our crops are getting ready to start up. And so that the timing mechanism is key. And then the other technique we've realized, and also not just for contamination reasons, but also to keep the crops away from deer and raccoons, which is a major pressure on these corn varieties, is that if we plant closer to the city, in suburban areas, or, just closer to the city, we're able to kind of avoid those pressures from raccoons and deer, but also, we're spatially distancing away from where the big, cornfields are at as well. So those are kind of the techniques that we use to keep things pure. And then, with some of the varieties, we know that, certain color traits of kernels, for example, are recessive. And so if you get cross-pollination into these varieties, you'll see that, a kernel will be a different color, and that is symbolic that it's been cross-pollinated. So you can kind of use the knowledge of genetics but at the phenotypic level, or the form level, to kind of see whether contamination has happened. So we've used that technique as well.
Nancy, in terms of like tomato breeding, what are what kind of techniques are you using, or what kind of tomatoes are you breeding that you're excited about? Like, how does that, let's start with the techniques that you use. Like, what are some techniques that you sort of employ to kind of breed tomatoes?
We mainly, we haven't really made crosses yet. What we did is like, since we got like from the breeder from Ohio, his wife gave us a bag of tomatoes that were going bad, and we asked her, like, we're going to save seeds, and she said, like, do whatever you want to do. And that was basically kind of like the foundation of and we call it, that one is like our all welcome tomato varieties, like all kind of colors and shape. We kind of pull it out some from there and like let it grow year after year until like we have the consistent phenotype or shape and color. And then I'm trying right now kind of like look at which varieties really like Kansas, in terms of like different like slicer tomatoes. So the grape, we have one grape cherry, which I really like it, and it seems like it likes here. And like we have plans kind of to move different colors onto it, which basically it's kind of very simple. But I haven't done any specific crosses, and mainly I really love like kind of like nature to go with it, and we leave a lot of like leftover tomatoes in the ground, and when the year comes, I love to save in those volunteer tomatoes. So, and then like trying to see what kind of what is gonna be. So this year we got a new beautiful kind of like grape shaped tomato. It's yellow. We never planted. We never did anything with it. But I saw the little plant when it came as a volunteer, and I tried to protect them. Matthew thinks like I protect all the volunteers, but I really like kind of like the plants. They can be very resilient, so I don't have to do much. So we just try to save seeds from plants that survive. That's what I do. And I think in the future, I'm planning to we got this variety from California, kind of black color tomato cherry. I want to move that on that color on the Grapescape. That's our variety, which really loves here. And I'm planning to do crosses on that both ways. What you basically do is before the tomato plant opens, you take it off the flower, open it up, and then from the flower that you want the pollen, you want to make sure that one is fully open so it has some pollen on it. You shake it on your finger, you're going to get a little powder. And then you just rub it up on the top of the other flower that you open up. And if it starts bulbing up a little bulb in 2 days, that means you had success. And you keep that one on track and germinate it again the seed and see what you get. So, but for now, I've been mainly focusing and saving the volunteer tomatoes. So, and we have, I think, this year we have at the field right now 18 different tomatoes, varieties. And all of them they like here. And we're trying to kind of go like with varieties that doesn't split much. None of ours have split much. There was one we had years back, but we don't sell the seeds of that. But our focus is like, because since we have drastic change here of the weather here, so I think it's very important for us to have tomatoes that is not as split easily. You're gonna have some, but not as easily.
Right. I love the simplicity of that, knowing that like you went to school for that and that you've kind of, you prefer to sort of let nature do the work. Like that there's something really poetic about that. I love it. The pandemic, you mentioned kind of the pandemic earlier on. How did that affect your business? Like you're cruising along, getting ready for another season, and then suddenly the pandemic hits and a lot of people are wanting to grow food. Like, was that dramatic for you all?
Yeah, it was actually, it was quite a surprise, and we were trying to navigate it because, like I said, we had the kind of the wholesale market going, which we were really excited about and really trying to expand that, and we were making pretty decent money with it. And then, pretty quickly overnight, the sales at the wholesale locations went down, and we started getting bombarded pretty hard, to just do our online sales, which we were set up well to do. And the demand it at least tripled, I imagine. Wouldn't you say, Nancy? I'm sure it at least tripled during that time. And so we were extremely busy during that time and sold out of quite a few varieties. And we had, we had a lot of returning customers that were kind of buying more seed, but we had a lot of people that really had never grown food before that were getting really interested. The pandemic, continuing on, and people are really starting to question the foundation of where our food comes from, and with global trade kind of in the air regarding whether or not we're going to be able to continue getting food in the Midwest from, global imports and stuff like that. People are really starting to kind of question where their food comes from, and the idea that maybe having local food here and growing our own food might be a good idea. And then, also with, people are at home quite a bit more and, maybe a bit bored and looking for something to do. So it just seems like a lot of that's really been increasing. And, it's interesting. I spoke with kind of an elder in the agricultural sector a while back, and I didn't really understand the comment when she said it, but she said, when the economy is doing really well, food businesses are, farming and food businesses at time are very difficult to make a living with. And I think all of us that have done market farming know that that can be a challenge to scratch out a living, and a lot of people are really, turned off by farming after a year or two because of the profit margins being so thin. And she said, when the economy crashes out, this is when, these kind of businesses thrive. And I didn't really understand what she was saying at the time, but, as soon as the economy started, crashing and the pandemic started, proliferating, our business started excelling. And so, there are often questions of, the longer that things are difficult, the better these kind of businesses do, and the more likely that, local efforts are going to really take hold, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, I think that's super fascinating. Specifically in terms of, what the long-term impacts of something like the pandemic are going to be on seeds, on produce. And I do think that, like, we noticed that too. We grow vegetables. That when the pandemic hit, that customers seemed particularly interested in knowing in locking down vegetables for the year and buying a CSA, so that they knew where they were coming from. And I think that will lodge in people's memory, that feeling of like going to the grocery store and not seeing any produce, or realizing like, I don't know how to grow my own food.
Right.
I think that'll lodge in the consciousness, in the same way that if you talk to people who survived World War II, and lived in Europe, they don't waste anything, or they didn't when they were around. Like they would never waste food. And I think like it's because they went through an experience where it was scarce. So hopefully, I mean, maybe that will lodge in the consciousness of more Americans.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously when we're thinking of a global pandemic, there's a lot of negativity associated with that. But like you're pointing out, the idea of moving to more localized and regionalized systems is obviously a better concept for the earth and for sustainability and for, cultural formation of, cultures that, are more in tune with the cycles of the earth and are living more within the means of the earth. And, I think that could be one of the bright sides of, the struggle that we're going through as a world, globally right now, is that, like you said, that point's really starting to hit home, that we need to be concerned about these things. And, and unfortunately, I think the longer that this goes on, obviously we don't like the suffering and the hardship that it's causing us, but there is that aspect of, really amplifying the transformation to local and regionalized food systems. And I think that that's kind of the, the silver lining, if you will, within, what we're going through right now as a species.
Yeah, and I think also it's affecting farmers too. We went through a situation in the spring where we never order all of our seed at once. So we had some of our seed ordered, but then the pandemic hit and the seed disappeared. And, we were realizing like there were a lot of crops that we always are able to get. We never have issues buying certain crops, and that suddenly became an issue. And that's gotten me more interested in talking to more seed savers and seed purveyors, because I think that it is important for us as growers to have some amount of attachment to more localized, adapted seeds, but also like our own skills at saving seeds. In terms of growers being able to improve their seed saving, what are some mistakes that are easily avoidable in saving your own seed or developing your own seed?
Nancy, you want to tackle that?
Okay. I think the main thing would be like figure it out I think like basically it's planning. Figure out whether you're because like figuring out, planning, knowing whether your seed is easily cross the distancing, because you can grow like many, like for example, common beans. they are very easily to grow. You can grow more than 2 varieties, not too close to each other, but known the minimum distance, and you can save seeds from them easily. And like for outcrossers like watermelon, squashes, and corn, you really have to separate them or grow in different years. 1 year, one variety, or timing out them. You want to grow it early, for example, corn, and then grow it later, the other corn. I think that thing will, because sometimes when we don't plan it out, then you plant it all together and you try to save seeds from this specific crop, and it becomes contaminated, and it's not what you were expecting. I think that's the only main thing is planification and knowing which ones you can plant close to each other. And I would say that's the main thing. And then of course there's an extra time of processing them, cleaning them, and storing them. Yeah, I think that's one thing. Like also, I think like I heard a lot of from growers or farmers that they collect the seeds, but they just put it in a bag and they kind of just forget about them. They never really had like I think labeling, because sometimes you think like, okay, I used to do that, but I don't do any more of that. It's like, I'm going to remember what is this going to be? And like, I think I have some seeds from 2014. I was like, what was this seed? What was the name of this seed? You don't remember it. You always have like now I have like my stack of paper with me and a pencil all the time. I get a seed, I put the name, whatever name, like if I don't remember exactly right there, the name, I'll put like exactly in which part of the field it is. And then in the night, I'll go, because we have maps, and look at like, okay, where is that one? Okay, that's what it is. I think like planning, labeling, it's very important so you don't mistakenly have the wrong seed.
Yeah. So the other one is the seed source as well. So if you're growing, hybrid varieties, oftentimes people will say not to save seeds from hybrid varieties. Now that does hold true if you're trying to, keep the variety true to type and you want the same thing next year. So oftentimes when you're getting started, it's good to, start with varieties that are, open pollinated and that they're true to type. That way you don't have to worry about, saving seeds from that F1 hybrid and then planting those out the next year. You'll get a field that's got a lot of variation in the whatever you're harvesting. But, the next level is, like we've got a variety of corn that's made up of probably 30 different pre-hybrid, like the old open pollinated landrace varieties from Ohio, that we mixed them all together and then hybridized them and planted them out. And then once you get the F1 seed from the hybrids, you plant those out the next year and they segregate out and you get all these different forms and functions. And this is really when the magic starts to happen. So as you kind of expand in seed saving, you can work with the hybrids and then, once they segregate out, you can, just save seeds from, red corn cobs, for example, in a field, and then plant all those and start making your own varieties as well. So it's, one shouldn't be totally pushed away from trying to save seeds from hybrids, but, should also know that, the next year they probably will not be the same, but you could potentially start, breeding them as well. And then, Nancy and I spend quite a bit of time, trying to figure out exactly when to harvest the seeds, because you oftentimes want things to, depending on what they are, but grains, you want them to, kind of dry out on the plants. But obviously if you've got a rainstorm coming in, that's going to, get the seeds wet and then potentially get mold on them. So really focusing in on, when the seed is mature and not letting it go too far to where, the elements will get to it or birds will get to it. I think, a few days ago, Nancy and I harvested quite a few tomatoes because she was concerned that there was a cold front coming in and rain was coming in, and she's saying, these are not really ready to harvest, but they're far enough along that if we harvest them, they'll turn color and the seeds will mature. But it was definitely pushing the envelope on, whether we should harvest them or not. But if we left them in the field, they would have, potentially split open and been open to, contamination and infection and so on and so forth. So really paying attention at that harvest stage is very, very critical. And there are some good resources out there. Seed Saver Exchange has got a really nice book, and I'm forgetting the name of it, that essentially has information on, like Nancy was saying, isolation distances that you need to, take into consideration when growing varieties out. Also, different types of seed saving techniques and things like this. So really, trying to explore that aspect. And I think it's been very difficult. Nancy and I have done market farming as well. And, during the season, things are wild, right? To grow the crops, to get them, prepare them, to get them ready for market. And, this is a lot of work. So oftentimes that seed saving aspect goes to the wayside. And then when the season starts calming down, it's like, you're done with the season kind of thing. So it is an extra step on the backside, that is a additional workload. But, if you plant out, a big row of arugula and, 3/4 of it you sell during market, and then you just let a quarter of it, go to seed. And then when your normal season would be done of selling at market, you start focusing in on the actual saving of the seeds, and then you can process through the winter as well. So there's kind of a staggered time in the workload, but it does require a slight transition in mindset to see the cycle of the plant all the way through and into the next season.
Well, that's great. Nancy and Matthew, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you all chatting with us.
Yeah, thank you
for having us.
It was a great pleasure to speak with you.
Absolutely.
All right, if you enjoyed that episode, make sure to follow Buffalo Seed Company on Instagram and Facebook and all the places. We'll hook it up with links in the show notes. You can purchase their seeds at buffaloseedcompany.com. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you're getting it and leave a review. But this week, all reviews must be prepped and planted using a Lucana because it's a fun tool to say. Big thanks to Jackson Roulette and Josh Satin for their help. Big thanks to Nemesis of Farm Sensibilities Everywhere, Willie Breeding, for the theme music. Huge thank you to my wife, Hannah, for every darn thing in the world. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Coast? How do we say the last name?
Oh, you're right on the first one. That's very rare. Usually people say Coast, but you're right. Cost, K-O-S-T, Cost.
Cost. Okay, great.
Good job.
All right. Nice. Cool. Okay. Well, I'm ready if you're ready.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Matthew, Nancy, Sorry, I almost said it wrong.